صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's an honor and a privilege to be spending the weekend with you. This course is one of my favorite courses to teach because it's not just an Islamic history course, but rather we're going to be examining one of the most important periods in the early history of Islam, the government of Ali ibn Abi Talib, not just so we can know what happened 14 centuries ago, but rather so we can understand some of the political patterns that seem to repeat themselves in every generation. So the idea here is that we want to understand some important political principles to understand the turmoil that we see in the world today. Because as the saying goes, history has a tendency to repeat itself. The tactics used by the enemies of Islam during the government of Ali ibn Abi Talib are the same tactics that are being used today, and inshallah I'll draw your attention to some of these issues. Now, when you look at this period, so the period of history that we're going to be looking at is 36 after the Hijrah to the Shahada of Imam Ali alayhi salam in the 40th year after the Hijrah. So we're basically focusing on 4 years of Islamic history and the lessons that we can derive from this short period of history. Because what happens in these 4 years essentially shape the future of Islam. Now, when you look at the life of the Holy Prophet, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, on numerous occasions emphasized the merit and the qualifications of Ali ibn Abi Talib. From the beginning of his prophetic mission, every opportunity the Prophet gets, he highlights the uniqueness of this man, and that he is the most qualified to lead, that he is Amirul Mu'mineen, the commander of the faithful, that Ali ibn Abi Talib is not just the individual that you refer to when you have a fiqh question, that he is the leader of religious and socio-political issues. When you look at what happened after the death of the Holy Prophet, there was a concerted effort to restrict the role of Ali ibn Abi Talib to religious issues. If you look at Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he became the Khalifa, the second Khalifa, he tried to restrict the role and the influence of Ali ibn Abi Talib to religious issues. For example, he says, لا يفتين أحدكم وعلي في المجلس, that no one is allowed to give a religious verdict when Ali is among us. So you see that Umar ibn al-Khattab wanted to restrict the role of Ali to someone who gives a fatwa, someone who gives you a religious verdict. The the economic decisions and the policies are to be determined by Umar and his administration. Now, you may ask, if the Prophet on numerous occasions spoke about the merit and the virtues of Ali, and he announced the appointment of Ali ibn Abi Talib on many occasions, specifically on the day of Ghadir, you know, what happened? Why did people turn away? How is it that the majority of the ummah went in a different direction? You have to understand, brothers and sisters, that number one, the majority of Muslims became Muslims after Mecca was conquered. So these are individuals that have become Muslim not necessarily because of strong conviction, but because Islam has now become the dominant force in the region. So the idea of, going along to get along. This is number one. So don't think that 120,000 companions now have entered the fold of Islam out of conviction. Many individuals who are now joining Islam are essentially surrendering to Islam because it's become a very powerful force. And those who are becoming Muslims now, either Ali ibn Abi Talib killed his father, killed his uncle, his cousin, his nephew, because in all of the battles, Ali ibn Abi Talib is the hero. So many people are becoming Muslim, and this man, Ali ibn Abi Talib, is the reason why my father's not around, my uncle's not around, my cousin. So they enter Islam with some animosity towards Ali ibn Abi Talib. They already have a grudge against him because family ties were everything in Arabia. Arabia was a very tribal society. And this is why when Ibn Abbas asks Umar ibn al-Khattab later on that, why wasn't Ali ibn Abi Talib given the Khilafah after the Prophet? He says, this was a private conversation, he says, because Quraysh did not want prophethood and Khilafah to be restricted to one tribe, to one clan. Bani Hashim, Nubuwah and Imam and Khilafah belongs to them. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. Everyone wants their tribe to have this position of power. Now, before we speak about the government of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the natural question that arises is if there was a concerted effort to keep him away from the Khilafah, what changed? How did Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam eventually become the fourth Khalifa? What were the circumstances that led to the establishment of his government? And as a side note, brothers and sisters, today and tomorrow, as you'll see, we're going to be covering a lot of material. It's a very dense course. So if you're able to, try to jot down some notes, because, the moment you walk out of the center, you're going to forget about 80%. By the time you get home, maybe 10% has been retained. And then a few days go by, and you're not going to know what happened in the years 36 AH to 40 AH. So try your best to jot down just some notes, some things that are new to you, because there will be information that I share with you that will probably be new and not something that you've heard from the pulpit. So I want to begin our discussion by speaking about the government of Uthman, because Ali ibn Abi Talib came to power after three companions ruled. Abu Bakr came to power after the Saqifa. He ruled for about 2 years. And then Umar ibn al-Khattab comes to power through appointment. So, when you ask our Sunni brothers and sisters, how do we determine who is the successor of the Prophet? If you say it's through election, through a democratic process, that didn't happen with Abu Bakr. There were only a handful of people that were at Saqifa. And that approach was nullified by Abu Bakr when he appointed Umar ibn al-Khattab. And then Uthman came to power because of a 6-man council. 6 individuals were appointed, and from among themselves they were to select the 3rd Khalifa. So Abu Bakr rules, Umar rules for a decade, and then Uthman comes to power. When Uthman comes to power, a lot of problems arise. You see, brothers and sisters, when Abu Bakr and Umar ruled, they were able to maintain optics. Meaning they weren't living lavishly. They were living relatively simple lives. When Uthman comes to power, he changes his government into essentially a royal family. He appoints relatives to power. He starts to appoint people to government positions who were banished by the Prophet. So now you have the Khalifa turning his family into a royal family. And wealth is being concentrated with one tribe. So naturally what happens at the end of his government, a revolution happens. A rebellion takes place. Now, before I speak about the rebellion that ultimately leads to his assassination and then the rise of Ali ibn Abi Talib's government, you have to understand some things about Uthman ibn Affan. Uthman ibn Affan, you have to understand the personality of this individual. Uthman ibn Affan was a muhajir. You see, the companions of the Holy Prophet are divided into two main groups. You have the muhajireen, the migrants, those who joined Islam early on, who left their homes, who sacrificed greatly for Islam, and then they ended up migrating to Medina. So these are the muhajireen. And then you have the ansar. The ansar are the helpers, those who gave and provided a safe haven to the early Muslims. Now, Uthman belongs to the muhajireen, and the muhajireen have a unique status in the eyes of the Muslims, because they're the ones who became Muslim when it was difficult to be a Muslim. They were Muslims when Muslims were being persecuted. They endured social, economic boycott. They were persecuted, abused. But Uthman ibn Affan did not suffer in the same way that other muhajireen suffered. Why? Because Uthman belongs to Bani Umayyah. Bani Umayyah, during the time of the Prophet, they were spearheading the campaign against Rasulullah. You know, Abu Sufyan is a member of Bani Umayyah. So when Uthman ibn Affan becomes a Muslim, he's not persecuted. Why? Because the enemies of the Prophet still consider him family. So he was off limits. He was also very wealthy. And you see this, you know, when the Muslims migrate from Medina, from Mecca to Medina, Uthman ibn Affan has a very aristocratic attitude. You know, wealthy people, extremely wealthy people, they don't like to get their hands dirty, right? When the mosque, the Masjid of the Prophet was being built in Medina, you know, everyone was participating. It was a collective effort. They were building the masjid together. Rasulullah was carrying bricks, Ammar ibn Yasir, everyone was engaged in the manual labor. But Uthman ibn Affan didn't want to touch anything. Because again, he comes from a very wealthy background. So he didn't suffer in the same way that other Muslims suffered in Mecca. And if you look at the early history of Islam, again, when you're wealthy, you're able to hire people to deal with your problems. It's one of the advantages of being wealthy. This is why, you know, if you look at the Battle of Uhud, this is what history tells us. He was one of the first ones to retreat in the Battle of Uhud. And in fact, later on, you know, when he's the Khalifa, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he acted as an advisor to these companions. Because Amir al-Mu'mineen, brothers and sisters, whether people recognize him or not, he's Amir al-Mu'mineen. He has to fulfill his role as the guardian of the Ummah, This ummah is an amana, it's a trust in his hands. Whether people acknowledge his authority or not, he's fulfilling his responsibility. He's guiding the ship. Whether he's considered the captain or not, he's still guiding the ship. So Amir al-Mu'mineen used to advise Uthman ibn Affan, and sometimes Uthman didn't like the advice that he was given. Amir al-Mu'mineen has a tendency to be very blunt sometimes. So Uthman, on one occasion, he becomes aggravated, irritated by the counsel of Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Uthman insults Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, you know, you're the one who the Prophet left behind when he went on his expedition to Tabuk. You know, he didn't find you worthy, he left you behind. Amir al-Mu'minin says, you're the one who ran away in Uhud. You're not in a position to talk about, you know, track record or resumes. So you see that it was known that this was an individual who was protected by his tribe. He didn't suffer in the same way that other Muslims suffered. He wasn't persecuted. He had wealth. He was not willing to engage in the manual labor that other Muslims were engaged in. And he also had a weak personality when it came to his relatives. You know, there are some people, they're religious, but they have trouble saying no to family, right? So he had a very malleable personality, and that's why you see, even though there may have been times where he wanted to follow the guidance of Ali ibn Abi Talib, he was always being pressured by family members. He had relatives whispering in his ears. Now, in the year 35 after the Hijrah, so you're talking about a little over 2 decades after the death of the Prophet, there were a lot of dangerous innovations that were introduced. You know, for example, the second Khalifa introduces the practice of Taraweeh prayers, where recommended prayers are conducted in congregation. And it sounds good, right? It sounds like a very noble thing. You know, why should everybody be scattered in the masjid? Let us unify everybody and let us offer these recommended prayers in congregation. You know, the banning of the temporary marriage, the banning of mut'at al-hajj, removing certain statements in the adhan. There were innovations that were introduced. But the most dangerous innovations that were introduced by the Khulafa after the Prophet were the social and the economic innovations. Things that changed the social dynamics. Now, what do I mean by this? When Umar ibn al-Khattab came to power, he changed the way that Baytul Mal was distributed. And this is documented in history. For example, Umar ibn al-Khattab decided that Muhajiri Muslims are to receive a larger stipend. You know, he reasoned that, you know, these are the Muslims that joined early on. They made sacrifices that were unparalleled. They receive a greater share. So again, creating this hierarchy in the Muslim community. The Ansari Muslims receive less. Muhajiris receive more. He also gave a larger stipend to Arabs. If you read the early history of Islam, Arabs received special treatment under Umar ibn al-Khattab. If you were an Arab, you received a larger monthly stipend from the Islamic treasury. Certain wives of the Prophet received higher stipends than others. So for example, Umar ibn al-Khattab gave certain privileges to certain wives. So for example, Aisha and Hafsa were receiving a larger stipend than some of the other wives of the Prophet. This is history, it's mentioned. Uthman then comes to power. And he lowers the monthly stipend of some of the wives. You know, if you look at the early history of Islam, you'll notice that Aisha doesn't like Uthman. If you read, she makes some very disparaging comments about Uthman. In fact, there are narrations where she actually calls for the killing of Uthman. You may ask me, where is this animosity coming from? It's coming from this. I mean, if you get to the bottom of it, this was the root of the conflict. She was enjoying certain privileges when her father was the Khalifa. When Umar ibn al-Khattab was the Khalifa, Uthman comes to power and he says, why should you guys get extra? You know, he was giving extra to his own family members, but he lowered the monthly stipend of Aisha. And then you have Aisha, who now considers Uthman ibn Affan public enemy number one. Now, when you look at the government of Uthman, so again, there's corruption on the economic level. It began with Umar ibn al-Khattab. You have now Uthman ibn Affan, who comes to power. He rocks the boat. For lack of a better word, he ticks off some very influential people who are connected to the Prophet, who are wives of the Prophet. He starts to give special treatment to members of his own clan. For example, Marwan ibn al-Hakam. He was the son-in-law of Uthman, and he was his chief advisor. The khums of North Africa was given to him. Can you imagine? The khums, the tax revenue from North Africa was given to one person, the son-in-law of Uthman. And people see this. There's widespread poverty. The Khalifa, who's supposed to represent the Prophet, who's supposed to implement the Sunnah, has now created a royal family. Everyone else is a peasant. And this is the new royal family. Furthermore, Uthman ibn Affan's government had zero tolerance for dissent or criticism. Hence, you find individuals like Abu Dhar. Abu Dhar, when he spoke out against this economic corruption, the nepotism. If I were to choose one word to describe the government of Uthman ibn Affan, nepotism. It was a nepotistic government. Abu Dhar speaks out. He's abused. And ultimately, he's banished to die alone in the desert. So there was zero tolerance for dissent. So all of this is happening in the year 35 after Hijrah. And then, and this is usually what happens. What causes revolution? Most of the time, economic inequality. If you look at the Arab Spring, what caused it? People didn't have food. You push people to the limit and people rebel. So people started to rebel. Now, the revolution started, since I have the markers, might as well write on the board, right? So revolutions and rebellions start to take place in 3 areas in the Islamic Empire. Kufa, right? Always a lot of problems in Kufa, right? In Egypt, and in Basra. So the rebellions happen in these 3 regions. When you look at these rebellions, the individuals who are leading these revolutions are actually very pious people. So for example, in Kufa, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this name, Malik al-Ashtar. Malik al-Ashtar is the leader of the Kufan rebellion. He becomes, the right-hand man of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Why is he revolting against Uthman? Why? Is it because he doesn't have food on the table? He was a military commander. Financially, Malik al-Ashtar is fine. He's receiving a stipend from the government. He's not poor. So why is he rising up? He's rising up for religious reasons. Because he sees that the Khalifa has departed from the Sunnah of the Prophet. And this is a lesson for us, brothers and sisters. Just because, you and I were living in the West, we're comfortable. We have a car, we have a nice home, our bills are paid. But just because you're comfortable, it doesn't mean that you don't have a responsibility towards what's happening in other parts of the Islamic world. So Malik al-Ashtar, as an individual, he's fine. But he sees that other people are being mistreated, they're oppressed, and he speaks out. He sees that the Khalifa, who's supposed to be the representative of the Prophet, is not implementing the Sunnah of the Prophet. So he speaks out, and he leads the Kufan rebellion. In Egypt, the head of the Egyptian rebellion, Muhammad, excuse my handwriting, I should have become a doctor. Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. He's the son of Abu Bakr, the first Khalifa, who was actually raised by Ali ibn Abi Talib, was one of the most devoted companions of the Imam. Again, military commander, pretty affluent, rising for religious reasons. They want to revive the Sunnah of the Prophet. And you have also a rebellion in Basra. Now, the heads of these rebellions are very prominent people, religious, moral people. But naturally, rebellions are contagious, right? When there's a rebellion in one region, there's an uprising in another, it becomes very contagious. And many people are joining the uprising, and they're motivated by materialistic interests. Just because the head of the rebellion is a noble person, it doesn't mean that everyone who's joining is also, has a noble motive. So there are many people who are joining because they feel like they're not getting their fair share of the pie. Where were the revolutions during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and Umar? There was also a departure from the Sunnah. But Abu Bakr and Umar, they were smarter in the sense that, one of the reasons why Umar ibn al-Khattab appoints Muawiyah to a position of power is because he knows, if you don't give Bani Umayyah a piece of the pie, they're going to rebel. So let me kind of keep them quiet. Let me feed that beast before it comes and attacks me. So this is happening. Uthman ignores it. Because where's Uthman now? What city is he in? He's in Medina. Medina is the capital of the Islamic Empire. Now, there's a rebellion in Kufa, in Egypt, Basra. And Uthman decides to call a meeting. He's a bit alarmed by these uprisings. He calls a meeting. He calls members of his family to come together to come up with a solution. They're not able to come up with an action plan. Everyone has their own opinion. And he continues to ignore it. The people have legitimate grievances. You have a nepotistic government. There's no transparency. There's widespread poverty. You're destroying the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet. So he ignores these rebellions until what happens? a delegation from Egypt descends upon Medina. So now people are like, okay, you're not hearing us in Kufa, in Egypt, and Basra, so we're going to bring what? We're going to bring the rebellion to your backyard. So the rebels gather in Medina now. Now you can ignore a Kufan rebellion, Egyptian rebellion, what's happening in Basra, but you can't ignore it when what? When it's happening in your backyard. So you can imagine that emotions are running very high. You know, when you see, it's like a mob mentality. When a lot of people are together, they're upset, they're frustrated, things can very easily escalate into violence. Now you may ask me, where's Ali ibn Abi Talib in all of this? Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, from the moment the Prophet passed away, when he saw that his right was taken, Amir al-Mu'mineen didn't just disappear for 25 years and says, to hell with you guys, you're on your own. Amir al-Mu'mineen sees that he has a responsibility. As I mentioned, whether they recognize him or not, he was always an advisor. Sometimes they listened to him, other times they refused. Amir al-Mu'mineen, again, because he's the spiritual father of this ummah, he sees Uthman unwilling to make any concessions. And he sees an angry mob. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam is acting as mediator now between Uthman and between the rebels. He's trying to tell them that you have legitimate grievances. I'm bringing it to Uthman. Let us try to resolve these problems in a peaceful manner. The Imam doesn't want people to escalate this into violence. He doesn't want this to just become mayhem. But again, when you have a lot of people and people are poor, and you have a Khalifa who's unwilling to listen, who refuses to make any change, people start taking the law into their own hands. And what happened was they decide to cut water to his palace. So again, Uthman is in his residence. They decide to cut water. Now, in Islam, even if you're dealing with your most bitter enemy, every human being, whether they're your friend or your foe, has a right to water. So they cut the water supply, and you find that the Imam alayhi salam, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, they cut the water supply. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam disapproved of this. And again, he tried to keep everything calm. He wanted there to be dialogue between the rebels and Uthman. Now, another important question that you have to ask, we have about 20 minutes and inshallah we'll break. I'll be very conscious of the time because I know that this is not like a typical 45-minute lecture. So 20 minutes we'll break for food and then inshallah we'll reconvene. Where's Muawiyah in this? Because Muawiyah is the governor of Sham. He's the governor of Damascus, appointed during the Khilafah of Umar ibn al-Khattab. And Uthman and Muawiyah belong to the same tribe. They're both Umayyads. Now, one important thing that you have to understand about Muawiyah as we go through this course, you have to draw a distinction between what Muawiyah says and what he does. Those are two very different things. You'll find that when we speak about the way that he does things, what Muawiyah says is not necessarily reflected in what he does. Now, again, so this is an enemy of the Islamic State, and this is a tactic that is used by politicians. You know, what is said is not a reflection of what's being done. Muawiyah says something, and he does something else. Just like, for example, today, we have to be, politically astute. We have to have this political awareness as Muslims. We shouldn't be naive. When the United States, for example, says, we are at war with ISIS, that's what they say. But what do? They sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, right? So you see that history repeats itself. Politicians will say something to appease the masses, but they'll do something else. And Muawiyah was an expert at this. He was an expert at human psychology. He was very Machiavellian in his ways. He'll say what needs to be said, but he'll do what he needs to do to achieve his political goals. Now, Muawiyah is fully aware of the events that are transpiring in Medina. So he's not, in the dark. He knows about the developments. Now, I mentioned that these are the three areas where a rebellion is taking place. The first place where the uprising happens is Kufa. The Kufans basically deposed of the governors of Uthman in the region. And then Uthman, calls that emergency meeting, as I mentioned. Nothing happens. And momentum builds. As I mentioned, the delegation from Egypt arrives in Medina. But again, Uthman is just not interested in making any changes. When Uthman sees that people are now protesting outside of his palace, what does he do? He sends a letter to Muawiyah asking for help. Because again, now the rebellion is in my backyard. So he asks for reinforcement. Now, what does Muawiyah do? You have to understand that Muawiyah is what right now? He's the governor of Sham. Do you think Muawiyah is satisfied with just being the governor? Right? When you have a Maserati, you want a Ferrari, right? You rarely ever see someone say, Alhamdulillah, that's all I want, nothing else. And Imam Zainul Abidin, what does he say? If the son of Adam were given 2 valleys of gold and silver, what is he going to do? He's going to go search for the third one. Allah in the Holy Quran says, إِنَّهُ لِحُبِّ الْخَيْرِ لَشَدِيدٌ. Human beings love wealth. They love money. They love dunya. They're obsessed with it. So Muawiyah is the governor of Sham. His cousin is the Khalifa. But when it comes to dunya, people don't care. You're blood or you're not blood, it doesn't matter. I've seen families, when someone passes away and they leave an inheritance, what happens? Brother fights with brother, brother fights with sister, the family falls apart. Why? Because of dunya, because a little bit of dunya. Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, when he was giving a talk to some Hawza students, he says that, year after year we send la'na upon Harun al-Rashid. We curse him. Why? Because he threw Imam Musa al-Kadhim in prison. He says to his students, but has the dunya of Harun al-Rashid ever been offered to you? It's easy to say that, I ain't about this dunya. But has you ain't about this dunya because you can't, because you don't have it. It hasn't been within your reach. It's easy to say, Alhamdulillah, I don't want any dunya, because the dunya hasn't come to you. So Muawiyah has his own aspirations. He's the governor of Sham, but he ultimately wants to be what? He wants to be the Khalifa. And the distance between Khilafah and Muawiyah is Uthman. It's the only thing between him now. So what does he do? His cousin is asking him for backup. I need help. Muawiyah is smart. What does he do? If he says no, they're going to know that something's not right. He's going to reveal that he has a desire to be the Khalifa. So what does he do? He sends an army to Medina. But he tells his army, I want you to stand at the border, be posted at the border, and only enter when I give you the green light. Why does he do this? For two reasons. Number one, to check off the box that you asked for help and I gave you help. I sent my army. They were stationed at the outskirts. The protesters in Medina, the rebels, now they see what? They see a massive army coming from Sham. Emotions are already running high. The presence of that army does what? Provokes the rebels. Right? It's like that spark. You know, gasoline, you just need a little bit of a spark and everything goes into flames. The presence of that army becomes the spark that ignites the rebels, and what happens? It leads to what? The assassination of Uthman. Brilliantly orchestrated plan. Muawiyah, he responds to the call. Uthman says, I need help. He sends the army, but don't really help. Go and be stationed at the border. I will give you the green light to help. But that green light never comes. The army is there just to do what? Just to provoke. There's hysteria, there's commotion. And then Uthman is killed. The narrations say that Uthman actually seeks refuge in one of the rooms of his palace that houses the Qur'ans. They go and they tear him to pieces. For the first time in the history of Islam, a Khalifa is killed by the Muslims. Now, when this happens, now you can imagine the position of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, when he's, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, when he sees people trying to enter the palace, as a stampede, he asks Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein to stand and protect. To protect who? To protect Uthman. Now you may ask me, why is Ali ibn Abi Talib putting Hassan and Hussein to protect Uthman? Does that mean Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen endorses everything that Uthman does? No. But Imam understands that this is a dangerous precedent that will be set. That we don't want Muslims to get into the habit of killing khulafa. This is dangerous. It's going to create chaos, pandemonium. But it happens. The Imam does everything he can to prevent it, to keep the mob peaceful, the rebels peaceful. Tries to prevent things from becoming violent. He tries to mediate. He tries to tell Uthman that they have legitimate grievances. You need to remove some of your governors. You need to equalize the monthly stipends. You have to remove your corrupt governors. He doesn't listen. Uthman ibn Affan is killed. Now at this time, there are still about 2,000 to 3,000 Sahaba that are still alive. And many of them are unknown. You know, during the lifetime of the Prophet, Rasulullah had about 120,000 companions. We don't know most of their names. But there are a few of them that are known, that are prominent. After the assassination of Uthman, there were certain companions that came forward and felt that they were contenders for the Khilafah. Talha, Zubayr, Sa'ad ibn Abi al-Waqqas, they were considered contenders and they were desirous of the Khilafah. But what happens after the assassination of Uthman? There's complete anarchy now in the Islamic Empire. Everyone is chanting the name of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Everyone wants Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now, why is it now, after almost 25 years, what changed? After the death of the Prophet, no one wanted Ali. Why is it now that 25 years later, everyone wants Ali ibn Abi Talib? For a few reasons. Number one, for 25 years, Muslims saw and witnessed the wisdom of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He served as an advisor. Whenever the Khulafa would listen to his advice, everything went smoothly. When they went against the counsel of Ali ibn Abi Talib, there was chaos. So the Imam alayhi salam had established a track record of being an advisor to the government. His suggestions and his advice was always seen as wise. It was always the pragmatic approach. This is number one. Number two, many prominent companions, highly respected companions, endorsed Ali ibn Abi Talib. People like Ammar ibn Yasir. Ammar ibn Yasir was very respected in the Muslim community, in Muslim society. When they see prominent individuals like Ammar, and everyone knew that Rasulullah had praised him, people were motivated to support Ali ibn Abi Talib. So, after the assassination of Uthman, people literally are surrounding the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib, begging him to assume the position of Khalifa. You know, usually politicians have to campaign for political office. They spend millions and millions of dollars to solicit support. Does Ali ibn Abi Talib campaign? In fact, even when Uthman was in power, Amirul Mu'mineen wasn't leading any of these rebellions. He wasn't leading any rebellions. He did not have a desire to overthrow Uthman. He said, listen, correct these grievances. They have legitimate concerns. They have legitimate complaints. Amirul Mu'mineen tried to remain neutral. This is why Uthman was willing to talk to him. He was not seen as the head of the rebellion, and he never gave anyone the sense that he was ambitious, that he had political ambitions. And people saw that. They surrounded his house. Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he tells them that, listen, I am willing to just remain as an advisor. Go find somebody else. Da'uni waltamisu ghayri. Go find someone else. But they insist. They're pressuring Ali ibn Abi Talib to take the reins. The Imam alayhi salam, he says to them, are you sure you want me to be the Khalifa? Do you know what that means? It means that I'm going to implement the Sunnah of Rasulullah, and that might be bitter for you. You might not like it. You know, as the saying goes, when you're accustomed to privilege, justice feels like oppression. And this is why people hated Ali. Because you have people, companions, wives of the Prophet, tabi'een, second generation Muslims, who were accustomed to privilege, special treatment. When you've become used to special treatment and privilege, when justice arrives, you feel like you're mazloom. When you're accustomed to privilege, justice feels like oppression. Now, we'll end with this, inshallah, we'll take a break. Amirul Mu'mineen tells them that, think about it. Imam was very open with them. You know, politicians sugarcoat things. I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to do that for you. The Imam says, listen, I'm going to implement the Sunnah of the Prophet. Those who were accustomed to privilege and who took more than their fair share from Baytul Mal, when I come to power, I'm going to knock on your door and you're going to give the money back. Do you still want me to be the Khalifa? You know, everyone, you know, you think Islam is just, you know, reciting dua and salah and fasting. No, we're going to establish economic justice. Social justice is the #1 item on my agenda. So the Imam says, come back. And some narrations say for 40 days they were camped out. And the Imam was refusing until he finally gives in, and swarms of people give bay'ah to Amir al-Mu'mineen. They pledge allegiance to him. Now let me end with this. What is this concept of bay'ah? What's the point of pledging allegiance to the Imam? Does the Imam need people to pledge allegiance to him? Does bay'ah give legitimacy to Ali ibn Abi Talib? It doesn't, because his legitimacy comes from the heavens. The Imam doesn't become qualified to lead because people give him bay'ah. Bay'ah, my dear brothers and sisters, is meant to recognize a qualified person, not to make a person qualified. There's a difference. Bay'ah, pledging allegiance, is a formal way of recognizing someone who's qualified. It doesn't make someone qualified, because the others, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, their bay'ah was meant to make them qualified. With Amir al-Mu'mineen, he was already qualified. You now have recognized that he was qualified. And the purpose of bay'ah, brothers and sisters, is you're making a commitment to be a participant in this government. The Imam has an agenda, social justice. When you put your hand in the hand of Ali, you're making a commitment that I am willing to participate and help you achieve your objective. Because a true Islamic government can only be established if the majority of people are willing to be participants. You can't impose an Islamic government on people. The masses have to be willing to participate. Now, an Islamic government doesn't need, a true Islamic government doesn't need mass support for legitimacy, but it needs it to achieve its goals. You can't establish a government and more than half of the population don't want you. So the people, they gather around Amir al-Mu'mineen and they give him the bay'ah. And inshallah, after the break, we'll speak about what Amir al-Mu'mineen does as soon as he comes to the seat of Khilafah. It's 3 o'clock, inshallah. We'll take a quick break. Keep going for another 10 minutes? Okay.
We have tea for ladies first. So please take your tea, whatever you want. And then the men's will go. And there is goodies for children. You can take as many as you like, unless they are gone. Please. Molan, is the break?
They just told me 10 minutes. Yeah. 10 more minutes? We'll a few more minutes and we'll conclude. Was there a question in the back?
We have keynote figures of the rebellious, like the group. You said the Egyptian delegation had come in there.
Yeah.
They came to get some questions answered, or they were part of the rebellion too, addition.
Yeah.
Following, do we know the keynote figures like Talha, Zubair, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, were they part of the rebellion?
Yes, yes. So Talha, Zubair, you know, the delegation from Egypt, they were part of the rebellion. In fact, Talha and Zubair, they were rebelling against the government of Uthman. And you'll see, inshallah, as we continue the discussion, they were the ones, some say that they were active participants in the assassination. And it's interesting that they use the argument that we have to avenge the killers of Uthman as the reason why they fight Ali ibn Abi Talib. The irony is Ali was the one who was trying to protect Uthman from being murdered. And Talha and Zubayr and others, even Aisha was calling for his murder. So you see that, it's kind of like the idea of, the murderer reading the eulogy at the funeral. They were the ones responsible. but they used that as their campaign slogan against Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now, as I mentioned, when people give bay'ah to the Imam, they were so anxious to undo the corruption and go back to the sunnah of the Holy Prophet that even in Nahj al-Balagha, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says that I was afraid that Hassan and Hussein, his sons, I was afraid that they were going to be trampled by the people who were coming from all around the Islamic empire to give me bay'ah. So this was really the first time after the death of the Prophet where the Ummah as a collective body wanted a specific leader. Because with Abu Bakr it was only a handful of people at Saqifa. You know, the majority of the Ummah was not even there. With Umar ibn al-Khattab, he was appointed by Abu Bakr. The Ummah was not consulted. With Uthman, it was only 6 people chosen by Umar ibn al-Khattab, and the people that were chosen, that had voting power, it was very clear that Ali ibn Abi Talib was not gonna rise to power. It was designed, that shura was designed to keep Ali ibn Abi Talib away from the Khilafah. So as you'll see, when Amir al-Mu'mineen comes to power, and you know, if you look at the political climate at the time, it's very clear that Ali ibn Abi Talib becomes the Khalifa purely for the sake of Allah. You know, because he's inheriting a mess. The Khalifa was just killed. There's chaos, and we'll speak about prominent individuals who gave bay'ah and then went against their allegiance, who broke their commitment to the Imam. And then you have Muawiyah who's still there. You know, the Imam will speak about how he sends a letter to Muawiyah, basically telling him to step down, and you'll see how Muawiyah reacts to that letter. And things will develop, and inshallah we'll be able to learn some practical lessons from this period of history. Are there any questions before we break? Yes. I think, you know, Muawiyah is in Sham. Sham, Syria is a parallel universe. And the reason why I say that is because the people of Sham had no problem with Uthman being the Khalifa because they were getting that special treatment. They were receiving very large stipends. But I think my humble analysis is I think that Muawiyah underestimated the popularity of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I don't think Muawiyah knew that if Uthman is assassinated, everyone will flock to Ali ibn Abi Talib. I think that he suspected there's going to be chaos, no leader is going to be chosen, and in that power vacuum, he'll rise. So I think that that was a miscalculation on his part. But you'll see, you know, what he does to kind of break the support system for Ali ibn Abi Talib, and how he tries to get in touch with powerful people in Medina and, you know, stroke their egos, telling people, oh, you know, you're more qualified. You know, if you stand against, I'll support you. So you'll see how Muawiyah essentially fights a proxy war with Ali ibn Abi Talib, at least in the first battle. So yeah, my understanding is that I think he underestimated the popularity of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And I don't think he imagined that after the assassination, so quickly people will flock to Ali ibn Abi Talib. That was his worst nightmare scenario. And you'll see how he deals with that. Question in the back.
Where was Abdullah ibn Umar in this, and was Aisha behind the scenes of Talha and Zubayr?
So we're going to get to that inshallah after the break. So there are other figures that are going to come into the narrative, and you'll see. Yeah, I'll speak about Abdullah ibn Umar and the position that he took, and how we need to learn from that, because Amir al-Mu'mineen was the last ma'soom that really ruled the Islamic world. So we need to learn how to align ourselves because the next ma'soom is the 12th Imam. So there are so many things that we can learn from the positions that people take. When Amir al-Mu'mineen is the Khalifa, there are things that we need to learn to avoid when the Imam alayhi salam reappears and establishes his government. Because if you look at the government of the Prophet, Rasulullah focused primarily on, interfaith, dealing with non-Muslims. But Ali ibn Abi Talib teaches us a lot about intrafaith relations. How do you deal with Muslims who have different theological persuasions? How do you deal with fitna in the Muslim community? The Prophet, his main enemies were non-Muslims. But with Amir al-Mu'mineen, he has to deal with the internal enemies, the fitna. How do you deal with conflict within the ummah? Okay, I think it's time to break. So we'll...
You can have all the questions and collect them. We'll give it to Maulana. He will reply after the lunch.
The brother is the official attorney for the sisters, alhamdulillah, today.
Sisters and brothers.
Sisters and brothers. So we'll have, how long is the break for lunch?
About half an hour.
About half an hour, 35 minutes. We'll give you a little bit of a break.
So please take your tea.
And inshallah we'll reconvene, okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Jazakallah Maulana.
Thank
Sorry for this.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Please.